Good morning. My name is Jennifer Gross. I'm a curator and art historian. I've also worked on some Catalogue Raisonné projects, and I'm here presenting on the panel Dematerialisation, the Catalogue Raisonné, and the Evolving Definition of Sculpture. As the panel led by Penelope Curtis on lifetime posthumous and editions has raised the specter of the fuzzy edges of sculpture as singular obdurate objects, I believe this panel has the privilege of exploring the literal dematerialization of mass into light, sound, motion, and ideas in the making of art as objects or sculpture today. We have been charged to review the singular challenges and possible solutions this raises for Catalogue Raisonné researchers, museum collections, and most importantly for artists. A direct address of these changes and built-in obsolescences of much of the material and technology of which sculpture can be comprised today is essential to answering questions about long-term stewardship. The primary issues the work can or how it can exist in the future. A few examples that I think are commonly known in our world today, compelling issues for conservators and for institutions, for example, are the television sets that Nam June Paik used to construct and create his sculpture, the issues surrounding projected light or images in sculptural installations. And I believe, as in the case of our co-panelist Deafbeef's work, a circumstance in which technology is actually creating the work anew in time in response to a set of either prescribed variables or generative algorithms. These are instances in which sculpture is revealed to be transitive rather than obdurate. Working in consultation with artists when the artist is living, and if not, with careful consideration of artistic intent informed by scholarship, there are a number of ways that conservators, curators, and scholars have begun to set precedences for managing these issues. Primary is to help artists to consider what they value in their work as they look to the future. And one of the primary means institutions certainly are trying to manage is to create questionnaires when they're taking a work into their collections, to ask the artist to sit down and really consider the possibilities of non-replication that will occur in the future, because various materials they've used to create their work will not be available, or in the case of technology, those support systems will have changed dramatically. So the artist can be equipped to define the parameters of presentation in terms of even emotional, physical realities that the work generates as goals for future generations to mark and to seek to reach towards when they're in fact embracing the work. The Museum of Modern Art has been at the forefront of asking and producing these questionnaires. They're very generous in sharing that information to both artists and institutions. So if you're out there looking for a template, I encourage you to contact them. One of the primary challenges that you encounter in these circumstances is one that many artists love to use materials that have inherent vice. An inherent vice is a direct embrace of entropy. And in terms of the present in time, we value in artworks that an artist can in fact reach for the moment, but and we value the work because it expresses that or is present in a way that conveys our culture in an immediate sense. But oftentimes institutions do not consider how that might be or might not be relevant in the future. And so before a work is taken into a collection, it's important, and certainly as a curator myself, I always present to my review committees the inherent vice in a work and get the institution to commit to it. And what that means is committing financial resources to either resolving that inherent vice or letting go of a certain value that the work conveys. And one of the most public examples of that is, in fact, the painter and sculptor Anselm Kiefer, who is very committed to the inherent vice in his work. He builds it into the work, and that actually is diabolical, some of his material decisions in terms of how the work functions as a sculpture or as a painting. And he's against that being fixed. So if you were to go to him and say, listen, all my newspaper has turned brown and there's actually no foreground to the painting that I purchased, but, of yours, how do we as an institution fix that? He's not interested in solving that problem. In fact, he's interested in how that defeats the experience in the first present tense of the object as it moves into the future. He doesn't believe that art necessarily has to be forever. So that's fine. An institution, and I've certainly done this, I acquired a Kiefer for a museum collection. You can temper that. You can say, I'm willing to lose this much from this work into the future, or our conservators can maintain something to a certain extent. So in other ways, institutions can work with an artist to take on those issues. A very good example when I was at Yale is we sought to acquire a Robert Morris felt piece. And that felt piece, if I was to acquire it, and I did locate from the Sonnabend collection, a beautiful, pristine 1960s felt piece. But the conservators at the institution would never let me exhibit that work because felt is so full of vice in terms of its subjectivity to light, but also to it absorbs dirt. So I could purchase that work for the collection, but never exhibit it. It would go in a box and be part of the collection for like a magical presentation 200 years into the future. And that seemed sort of tragic. And excitedly, Robert Morris was still working in an extended place on that felt series. So it's continuous. So he was active in thinking about that. And so the institution approached him and asked him if there would be a way for him to make an exhibition copy of this original 60s beautiful piece. So that could actually be the missive into the future about the period in which it was made, the artist's interest in materials, but there could be a copy that could be presented in the galleries that the artist himself felt comfortable with. And so this went on for a long time. And the beautiful thing that came out of this is that it turned out that Robert Morris, not very well documented, physically performed those felt pieces into existence. So he physically performed a new replica into being, and that was documented on video. And then he created a felt piece, the felt piece, that was the same in his mind as the original. And it looked nothing like the original, which is just a marvelous revelation of how the works in his mind were not the finished product, but were in terms of the process of their creation. And so that became part of the history. And that exhibition copy can be burned into the ground in the galleries. So the conservators are happy for that replica to be exhibited all the time, can be part of exhibitions, group exhibitions, it can be lent. And with it would go this narrative about the, in fact, piece itself. And that process again informed the institution, later acquired a felt piece from Barry LeVay. And Barry took that whole narrative into a whole different place, again, creating a work that looked exactly like his original. And that replica can be exhibited all the time. So these kinds of interesting questions really best come to the artists themselves. But I think previously in history, they're not necessarily been thinking take them on. And I'll share one other example that has to do with an in-time work, an artist who will remain nameless. But I worked at a different institution. There was a sculpture that artist had made that had gone out. It had been acquired by the institution and gone out on loan on a series of lending. And it was a mechanical piece that had an element that dragged on the floor. Well, it had never been constructed to be experiencing this great duress, exhibition venue after exhibition venue, or even on a non-smooth floor. So it kept falling apart, reconstructing, being taken out of exhibition. Oh, that certainly doesn't represent the artist very well, and had been a consideration she'd never thought of, I think, in terms of creating the work. And this institution didn't have a lot of money. They didn't have a conservation staff. There was no way that they were going to be committed to that work long term. So long story short, went back to the artist, asked the artist if there was a way that artist could be exhibited in this collection, the collection to acquire the work. Could there be a swap out so that she could sell this work that needed higher attention long-term and put it back in the stream because it was a wonderful work, and give the institution that didn't have the money to support it in its collection a work that had much less conservation needs. And so again, getting the artist to participate in their own process of the life of their work long-term is a really burning issue in terms of the present tense in art maintenance. But a significant historical exemplar of this problem was at Yale. Marcel Duchamp's original rotary glass plates machine was in the collection, and that work went out on a traveling exhibition and was broken irreparably. And it's a significant art historical work. And so what we decided was to, first of all, bring it home and find out if it could be repaired. And we convene a panel of experts, conservators, museum curators, scholars, to assess what was valued by Marcel Duchamp when he created the rotary glass machines. And it was determined that the physical object itself, he wasn't a sculptor per se, but that the light and energy, the optical illusion that the machine created was in fact why he constructed it. In fact, it wasn't really constructed very well. It almost decapitated Man Ray when they played with it in his studio, and that the glass could never be remade as it was and operated. It would definitely be a dangerous object. So long story short, over a 3-year period, it was determined that the optical effect needed to be replicated and that the object represented how Duchamp made it. And so the object was restored, but it was never sanctioned to be run again. And it was never going to be lent again, but it could be presented. So scholars could study it. It could be in the galleries at Yale. But a new machine was constructed, an optical machine. It looks nothing like the original Duchamp work. We worked very hard to, in fact, get all the light and color, but time goes by, materials are different. So it was a contemporary machine, but it reconstructed the force of energy of the physical experience of turning that machine on and replicated the optical effect, which had been, in fact, Duchamp's goal in creating this object. That machine can never be lent out of the galleries at Yale, can never be presented as a work by Marcel Duchamp, but it can be demonstrated to perform the optical effect that was irreparably lost from the original object. So all of the documentation that went into making those decisions goes into the file of the object for scholars to consider into the future. Maybe their positions, like many conservation decisions, will change in the future, but it brings to bear the kind of considerations in this field that need to be taken into place, where we really respect the artist idea and seek to choose to honor that as well as the physical manifestation of that idea in time when they constructed it. So those are some of the questions that I'd like to raise out for our future conversation, but there you go.
So thank you so much for inviting me to be part of this panel, thinking through the problems of Catalogue Raisonné. I have the great honor of being the very first executive director of Holt Smithson Foundation. And we are an artist-endowed foundation dedicated to the creative legacies of Nancy Holt and Robert Smithson. We're trying to set up a new model of an artist foundation. One way that we're doing this is we are a time-bound organization. So we were literally willed into being by Nancy Holt in 2014. We became active in 2018. And our plan is to terminate in 2038, which is 100 years after both artists were born. So already in this sort of mission-based statement, I'm revealing that Catalogue Raisonnés are a problem, an interesting problem for us to think about. One of the things about being a time-bound organization is that we see ourselves as embracing problems. We have 20 years to try and get to grips with the incredible complications of both of these artists' work. So we effectuate our mission in a number of ways. And one of our ambitions is to create catalogue raisonnés for both of these artists. And in fact, as I'm talking to you today, it comes exactly 1 week after our very first Catalogue Raisonné committee. So we want to make catalogue raisonnés, and we know it is inherently complicated. Why is it complicated? Well, because of the nature of both of these artists' work. There's a great phrase that Jennifer used, fuzzy edges. Both Holt and Smithson really blurred that boundary between artwork and archive. And one of the resounding elements of their work is they're constantly rethinking or maybe even recalibrating where art can be, what its limits may be. So somewhat indulgently, I want to share our ideas and challenges with you. And I'm going to show a number of images in quite quick succession, really to give you a sense of the kinds of problems that we're wrestling with. So in our very first Catalogue Raisonné committee meeting, we asked ourselves some fundamental questions. And the big one, why are we making Catalogue Raisonnés? Well, that in a way, quite a simple question. We want to create a resource for researchers to develop their research departing from Holt and Smithson. Okay, that's quite simple. So this means that our Catalogue Raisonnés must be factually correct. Secondly, who are these researchers? Who are the Catalogue Raisonnés for? Well, they're for artists, curators, art historians, students, professionals, every variety of person you can think of. What does that mean? Well, it means that the Catalogue Raisonnés need to be clear and accurate. Something that I feel very strongly that any artist or organization developing a Catalogue Raisonné is you have to think about how it relates to your values as an organization, as a person. So our foundation is committed to knowledge being free for everybody. So this means for us, our Catalogue Raisonnés must be free. So this has led us to decide that our Catalogue Raisonné will be digital, and there's another advantage that I'll come on to in a moment, but also access must be free. So this means that some existing, I don't know, recipes, prescriptions that are very good for Catalogue Raisonnés will not be right for us. We also want to make sure that our Catalogue Raisonnés are in at least 2 languages. And it will probably be in English and in Spanish because accessibility is really important to us. So we also want to make sure that our Catalogue Raisonné is situated in the present. So what does that mean? Well, this really speaks to some of the questions, some of the very erudite questions that Jennifer raised. Art is something that changes over time. When we think through the work of Holt and Smithson, there's the artist's work. There's the way that the work circulates within art history and within artistic practice. So we will be very clear and make a method statement, which of course, as you all know, as experts on Catalogue Raisonnés, which I am and we are not, is fundamental to making such a Catalogue Raisonné. So as an example, just to show you how complicated it is, think about Robert Smithson's spiral jetting. What is it? Well, it is many things. It's an earthwork on the Great Salt Lake at Roselle Point. It's an essay. It's a film. It's a set of drawings. It's a mobile sculpture through the photography that Robert Smithson encouraged to take place. photographs he made, photographs Nancy Holt made, and photographs that continue to grow. But then there's something else. It's the journey to the artwork. So I really understand Spiral Jetty and a lot of both Holt and Smithson's works as distributed sculptures. It's almost as if there's an arc of ideas. So how do we think about that in relation to a catalogue raisonné? And then with Smithson, of course, he makes it yet more complicated. The slide I showed earlier had a quote from him. He said that in the case of a great artist, a glance can be an artwork. Well, we're not going to catalogue every glance that Robert Smithson made. And then with Spiral Jetty, he described it as a document. Well, it's not a document. It has an object status. You can go and see it. And it certainly can't be stored in an archive. So this is why we're really thinking about this arc of an artwork. We're thinking about our catalogue raisonnés as an atlas of artworks. So really as a map of ideas. And we're fully aware that maps are contingent and written from the place from which the map is being drawn out. So this partiality is something that we need to embrace. And when I talk about partiality, I don't mean partiality in terms of bringing in emotion or bringing in even a set of conditions that are performing for the market. It's the sense that ideas shift. Now, within our methodology, we know we need to have a clear lexicon of terms. What is an earthwork? What is a non-site? What is a systems work? What is a drawing? What is a film? What is a slide work? What is a photographic series? So it's really thinking through this idea of the distributed field of sculpture. Something else that we know as well, as I mentioned at the start of this mini presentation, that we're a time-bound organization. So what are we going to do with this catalogue raisonné? Well, the great luxury, and I have to say it really is a great luxury of a time-bound organization, is we need to think about sustaining ideas. So our plan for our very final gesture of a foundation is that we will gift the catalogue raisonné and our website and our intellectual property to a research-led arm of either a museum or an academic organization. We have no idea who it will be because we don't know what a catalogue raisonné is going to be. Now, having said this kind of description that maybe sounds as if we are more confident than we really are, there's a whole collection of things that keep us awake at night thinking about our catalogue raisonné. And I want to close with what our big problems are. They're pragmatic and they're poetic and they're philosophical. The pragmatic one is we have to accept it takes money to do this. We need to build a digital interface that can be looked after. We need to do the research, and we know that there needs to be an art historian who's external to our foundation to do this. And we also know the kind of art historian we need to work with. So an in the weeds art historian who really cares what week, in which month, in 1969, for example, that Smithson and Holt traveled to Mexico. So that sort of detail we need to have the financial resources to do. We also need to make sure that we keep the ideas of these two artists alive. Two artists who were intellectual sparring partners, who were partners, but who had different lifespans and also very different works. Yet they were also collaborators. So Smithson passed away in 1973. Between 1966 and 1973, Holt and Smithson worked closely together. And then from 73 to 2014, Holt looked after Smithson's estate. So that's another knot we need to think about. How do we calibrate that? We also need to think about the fuzzy edges. These are artists who did not make object-based sculptures, yet their practices are really riven in the history and future of sculpture. We also have a big problem and a big responsibility. We have no precedents. So this means that when we make our catalogue raisonnés, we will be making a model for others to depart from. So again, as a little example, so many works by both artists manifest themselves in photography, even though they are sculptures. So I often dream that there would be an Anna Mendieta catalogue raisonné. Her work would be a great precedent, but it doesn't exist. So we're launching into this venture, knowing we will make mistakes, but I hope that we can share with the wider art historical community our problems, our errors, so that we can find a way to make a workable catalogue raisonné for artists whose artistic practice vehemently pushes against being fixed, being singular, and being tied down to a very traditional notion of a thing that you look at.
Hello, my name is Tyler DeWitt, better known to many as the artist Deafbeef. Thank you, ICRA, for having me, and I look forward to conversation with Lisa and Jennifer. Today I'd like to share an artwork titled Entropy that relates to this panel's topics. I'll begin by sharing a little about my art practice and blockchain technologies and NFTs. I'm an audiovisual generative artist. In my art practice, I write computer code that implements automated systems that synthesize and generate sound and animation, using these systems as tools to explore aesthetic possibilities. This process is broadly known as generative art. A key aspect of my particular generative art practice is that I've intentionally chosen a very basic tool set that is fundamental, you could say even primitive. I use only a cheap laptop and very conservative programming language called C language. This language hasn't changed in decades, and yet remains and will remain widely supported due to its essential nature. Although tedious, there are several reasons I work this way. To avoid the moving target and rapid pace of change of media production software. My desire is for my tools to remain constant so that I can focus on honing myself and my craft at my own pace, even when personal time is fragmented or includes prolonged breaks, sometimes of several years. By removing this external dependency, I give myself the opportunity for personal exploration of fundamental knowledge and processes, rather than arbitrary ones imposed by a fast-moving world. The second reason is that I wish to maintain an intimate relationship with the underlying medium. I conceive of my process as directly manipulating raw digital information, sequences of numbers that correspond to perceptual signals, either sonically or visually. My past experience with engineering and music technology, as well as my ongoing experience through this practice, both aid me in understanding the mapping between signal representations and their perception. In contrast, off-the-shelf systems must necessarily work at a higher level of abstraction to benefit less technical users or time-sensitive commercial use cases. This may impose or encourage certain forms or processes while limiting or inconveniencing others. Making one's tools is more tedious, prone to error, riskier, but ultimately allows a greater chance for a unique or radical expression. The emphasis on the materiality of the information substrate relates in some way to sculpture. Some precedents I can name are the early manipulation of recorded media, for example Pierre Schaeffer's Musique Concrète. Closest is the direct animation and graphical sound techniques of early experimental filmmakers, who would draw, cut, or scratch directly onto the film stock, not only the animation frames, but also a direct visual representation of the sound signals, thus making it a complete synthesis, independent of any pre-recorded material, and not requiring any camera or microphone. Recently my work has intersected with blockchain technology and NFTs. Briefly, a blockchain is a decentralized network of computers that implements a secure, permanent public record of transactions, acting as a public ledger. It allows users, identified by unique numerical addresses, to transact with others securely and trustlessly. NFT stands for non-fungible token. An NFT is simply an entry in this online decentralized database that indicates an association between a user's address and some digital asset. You can think of it as a receipt, a certificate, a deed to a property, or a signed photographic print. Notably, the NFT in the vast majority of cases is not the digital artwork itself. It's simply a pointer to the asset that may exist elsewhere. The nature of association between user's address and the asset is determined through social consensus, in the same way that the value of any currency is determined through social consensus. NFTs can be transferred by their owners, sold, exchanged, and a record of those transactions is stored permanently and publicly on the blockchain network. This has implications for provenance of digital art. Moreover, in the case of generative art, the instructions themselves can be stored directly and permanently on the blockchain, making the NFT no longer just a pointer, but a self-contained recipe that can generate the complete artwork. This has implications for preservation of this specific form of digital art. I'll now show you the artwork titled Entropy. Entropy is a generative audiovisual artwork that explores themes of permanence and ownership, both central themes of this new medium of decentralized transactional networks. It is implemented as an NFT. The system of instructions that generate the artwork are stored permanently on-chain, guaranteeing its existence, and yet also implementing its eventual destruction. For every time that the NFT token is transferred, these instructions implement an artificial system of degradation, causing the artwork to degrade in a similar manner to the generation loss that occurs when analog media is repeatedly copied. The sound and image become progressively noisier and indistinct, and after many transfers will become a wash of noise. You could say that entropy literally dematerializes, although in the context of what I understand dematerialization in art to mean, it's more accurate to say that it de-emphasizes or calls into question the material aspect of permanence, a central theme of blockchain technology. Secondly, in the high-velocity, speculative, low-friction environment of the crypto art world, by de-incentivizing frequent resale, entropy resists commodification, or at least comments on how value is socially constructed, or in this case, how a devaluation is socially constructed. Note that the degradation process is artificial in the sense that no information is actually lost, since the instructions to reconstruct the artwork remain permanent and unchanged. Not even the owner has the ability to destroy, due to the nature of a decentralized blockchain network. It is only through social consensus that we deem that the token has undergone any form of degradation, and how that affects its commodity value. Finally, entropy is not only conceptual, but makes a sensuous statement about human temporality and mortality that is widely relatable. Thank you.
Thank you for that wonderful trio of presentations. It was incredible. I think I will pass it over to Lisa, who will begin to ask some questions, and then the conversation can just flow from there.
Thank you for your presentations. Really, really fantastic. There's a word that's haunting the three of us, which is entropy. And entropy was something that was really fundamental to Smithson's ideas that artworks change over time, that ultimately everything moves into nothing. So, I mean, Tyler, as an artist working today, does the idea of thinking about sustaining your artwork into the long future, do you find it helpful, or do you find it restricting? And Jennifer, I want to ask you that too, because you really laid out in your presentation this wise advice for artists working today, that we need to think, or they need to think about how their artwork exists into the future. Does that take spontaneity out? And Catalogue Raisonné, is it something for art present or art history? And maybe Tyler, you could respond to that, as you're the artist on our panel, and I'm itching to know whether you're really thinking about this post-life for your artwork.
Well, I mean, in my situation, it's kind of a sort of a unique situation. I was not thinking about the preservation of my art for the distant future at the time that I made it. This notion of permanence and having constant tools was more of a practical, the practical implications for myself in my own working process, being able to come back to things in the future and not have them have changed so that I can continue that process. And so what has happened recently, this kind of intersection of many things with blockchain technologies and NFTs, this was kind of circumstantial in that regard, that my process being, you know, having these elements of permanence and thinking about how they take advantage of those properties, just so happen to collide with this idea of preservation and these themes of blockchains and permanence.
It's kind of fascinating, actually, because that's, I think, inherent to this conversation, is that in a sense, the technology itself became a bulwark against a kind of loss of control. It was fascinating to me, your presentation, because in essence, you as an artist made your work. And then, as you just said, it revealed to you that there were these other, things going on in the world, which is how creative process is so timely in our culture, right? It's where art making reflects. You don't have to make that a conscious decision. It's an organic, it's been organic to your process. And now it in fact is taking on what are some of these Catalogue Raisonné issues in terms of what we value in creative process and creativity. But in your case, as you say, it's an exception. You don't have to make that choice. You're still making the work. This was built into the tools that you made. And I think for many artists, I think, Lisa, you're drawing out a really good, it shouldn't be driving the thinking. That is handicapping in terms of being a creative person. But in fact, are these things going to become, because technological tools are such an in-time processor of ideas today, does that even for a very on-hands artist affect their own interaction with their work? It's creating a set of decision-making processes that are outside of their physical experience. And that is in fact part of the creative process now. So maybe it's not necessarily artificial. There's a nice sort of segue there. But Tyler, I really love that that's, as you state, just part of your journey as a creative person. It's pretty great.
You mentioned earlier, Jennifer, Namjoon Paik's work. And of course, his work is also working with the limits of technology, the particular hardware that he works with. And I guess it's really this question that for museums, for curators, for artist endowed foundations, maybe it's less about fixing an artwork through the CR process. It's about finding the parameters of the artwork. So I think quite often about curators, and being one, I think I can be a little bit dismissive of us. Curators often love Hanterax monitors when they show early video work. And Hanterax monitors are these square cube monitors, and they're so often used as being the way to show video sculpture from the 1970s. Hand-to-axes are actually a 1980s model, but they've come to represent this particular way of showing. And I kind of think that we need to look at not only artistic practice, but curatorial practice or exhibition making practice as well. And one of the questions that we have with Nancy Holt's work is some of the images I showed are from her systems works. These systems works were made in the 1970s, and you will have seen one electrical system that used light bulbs from the 1970s. Now, when we present that work today, we use LED bulbs. Why do we do that? Is it true to the work? Well, we feel it's true to the work because LED bulbs are greener. They're local, they're more widely used, rather than having some kind of nostalgic going back to another time. And I think that one of all challenges with Catalogue Raisonné is keeping the work alive in some way. How can we make sure that the artwork doesn't become, to quote Smithson, the exhibition doesn't become like a mausoleum? It has to be about this amazing power of work into many future versions of the present.
That's a great question. I think being honest about those decisions is really what has to happen, right? So you're documenting the LED choice as one that the curators in a certain amount of time, just like those monitors that you said are from the 80s. So then that's like an 80s interpretation of whichever artist's work. That's fine, as long as we've got an original standard in the Catalogue Raisonné of what the artist saw and valued at that time. And I'm going to let you speak, Tyler, but I wanted to say, Lisa, that you raised a great question regarding Smith and Holt in the long term, is if you close your Catalogue Raisonné, you as a foundation actually could endow a return every 10 years, is it every 20 years, every 50 years, to a set of questions that you determined were really important to them, that a series of people in that time could then hold up to the work again and see how those values changes. Like, so if the standard of questions is consistent, as Catalogue Raisonnés do in fact provide as a sort of a rubric for us looking at things, you as an institution could be committed to that re-engaged conversation, so that as values change, as people see how we see, literally how people are seeing now is so different than it used to be. Technology is changing all of that, that the standard records that and assesses the work then according to this new shift. And then of course decisions would be made in time. That's for material culture. But anyway, Tyler, I think in your work, it's all going fast.
Yeah, right. Like, I mean, my narrow experience is within this very narrow kind of subset of digital art. And so it's really fascinating to, think about the contexts of work from previous decades and how that's being preserved, and how the contexts change. And yeah, like, I mean, at first glance, just like me, like seeing these things happen, like it's such a messy, fuzzy problem. And yeah, like there's so many things to consider. And
yeah, it almost feels that we need to celebrate that fuzziness and that blurriness. And perhaps what we'll find at the end of this conference session is that we're not going to have any answers. We're going to have yet more questions, and perhaps I mentioned about the importance of artwork being something that's alive, that transcends its own time. It's the same with the Catalogue Raisonné as well. How can we make sure that this art historical standard is something that remains in tune with the times? And something I know, Tyler, that you'll know a million times better than me is that we need to remember, if we're thinking about digital Catalogue Raisonnés, that that platform isn't always going to be able to hold that information.
Correct.
So
Yeah.
we need to make sure that we plan ahead for the material sustainability of any digital catalogue raisonnés. And I kind of wonder if what we will find ourselves doing is having a print backup of the digital catalogue raisonné, rather like in the way that 35mm film is sometimes used as a sustainable backup for digital technologies and digitally scanned documents. So maybe it's just this constant shifting and reciprocal relationship that the digital has not overtaken the analog. It's just that the relationship is twisting and turning.
Yeah, there's complicated, like, you know, like transcoding of information that's taking place over time, and trying to find the lowest common denominator that can support all of that is extremely tricky. Like, also taking into taking in like the context of the work. So like, I mean, like digital work that was made using Flash, like just recently, like if you know, the Flash plugin has just been taken out of existence, right? And so somebody has to take those systems and take basically a snapshot of that so that we can preserve those things that have taken place. And that's just one example. And there's millions of examples, and it's just in such a state of acceleration, in constant flux, that yeah, it seems like it will always be a moving target to do that. And the stewardship will necessarily just have to take that into account. And like you said, like, you know, invest that energy to basically making it so that it does not dissipate, right? Because with entropy, that's the way it works. You need extra energy to come into the system in order to save it from, you know, heterogeneous, to like achieving, moving towards a heterogeneous state. So, yeah.
Or we have to accept the mortality of
Yes,
what
exactly. Or just
what we
accept
do.
that. You know?
So whether it's the catalogue raisonné or the artwork itself, that it happens in a moment, it contributes to the field, but then all the variables can change. And I think there's, again, this is, while the issues are new to our time, in conservation history, this has already existed, where an assessment is made of an artwork, and then we find out 100 years later that that assessment was entirely incorrect. The scholars did the best they could to document either the material life of the object, their attribution of who made it, its position in its culture, its value in its culture. And then 100 years later, another scholar comes along with new technology to analyze that object, new scholarship to put it in its cultural context, and an entirely different decision is made. And so that will be, we can only do what we can do, right? Artists can only make what they can make and give it its best launching pad. But I mean, so much technological work is already, as you stated with Flash, it's just gone. Works are gone. There's nobody to pay to revive that work, stabilize work, step into that gap any longer. There's not even people who know how to use those tools anymore. It's gone under the bridge. And so it's knowledge for the artist moving forward, sobering knowledge, perhaps.
For us at Holt Smithson Foundation, we work very, very closely with Dear Art Foundation, who steward and have in their collection Robert Smithson's Spiral Jetty. And this is a work that changes all the time. The water of the Great Salt Lake comes up, it goes down. Literally, the process of entropy is happening every single day. And we often say that this is an artwork that we would never want to build it up to how it was when Smithson first made the work, because that's not what the artist wanted. And this is maybe a slightly silly analogy, but I think hopefully it's useful that we as human beings, we have a life. And one of the amazing things about being alive is that we have a life. We need to make good use of every day that we have. And we physically change over time. And let's say we get into the middle of our life, let's imagine we'll all live to be 160. So when we hit 60 or so, our physical form has changed. And we've really got a few choices. We can either just let our physical form change, or we can maybe stop, and instead of, I don't know, eating cake for breakfast, we might eat some fruit and do a little bit of exercise so that we can keep our longevity, sustain our lives and be fit and look good. Or we can have extreme elective surgery to turn ourselves back to what we looked like when we were 18 years old. But if you do that, you will appear as a complete fiction, because in erasing time, you indicate that you are erasing time. And it's the same with spiral jetty. Its power is that it's analogous to the human life, the changing surface of the landscape, and that entropic field is part of the reason why art is so important. And if we believe, which I do, that art is all about the production of ideas, we have to understand there'll be layering of research, there'll be contestations, new aspects, new possibilities for thinking about art. And this is why art is so important. It's not stable. It changes as the world around it changes.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, there's a contradiction there, like in, to preserve or to the desire to become permanent, like in an attempt to transcend material, that really you embrace a material aspect of that, and it leads to that contradiction.
So Tyler, moving forward, so are there new technologies or new ways that you're thinking of your work in response to the recent valuation of NFTs and how it's created the opportunity for you to present your work, I assume, to an even broader audience? Or are you going to keep doing things the way you are because you had already made the decisions that best worked for you in terms of producing your work?
Yeah, it's kind of an open question. So, I mean, just to be honest, like this has been like a very, very fast kind of, like I feel like I've been sort of dropped in, like parachuted into this kind of new territory, and I'm trying to get my bearings, right? And so all these things that are happening, it's like it's influencing me. It's influencing how I think about my work and probably the direction of it in the future. But for right now, it's really just kind of like sort of a listening kind of mode, and figuring out, kind of responding to what is taking place. Like my workflow, like I really enjoy like what it is that I was working on before this. It wasn't as a result of NFTs that I came to this, and so I'll likely continue that as it is. But again, there's a number of really interesting kind of things that are coming up with decentralized blockchain technologies conceptually and otherwise and technically that will lead to new fertile ground for artwork. So it remains to be seen.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you all so much. This has been a fascinating panel about all kinds of new questions that people working on Catalogue Raisonné are going to be facing in the future. And it was just wonderful to hear from all three of you. So thank you again.